Hello, and welcome to another U.S. Tech Workers podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lynn, and today is Thursday, July 18th, 2019. And I have the real privilege to be joined today by a tech worker, Ellwood Davis. And his story is an amazing one. His accomplishments are manifold. And like many tech workers today, he's having a lot of trouble finding job opportunities. And when we go in and we discuss his resume and experience, I think you're going to find your jaw dropping. It's like, how can this guy have trouble finding opportunities? Tech workers out there know what's going on. We know there's unbridled displacement going on. We have corporations that simply don't want to pay the salaries. They want a quiescent workforce. They don't want to pay the pensions. And they're willing to sacrifice quality for quick-term profit. So without any further ado, Ellwood, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, how are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. I'm glad to have you on. Is our connection pretty good? You're hearing me okay?
Yes, I am hearing you. Well, our connection is very good.
Great. Well, you're coming in great. And Ellwood, before we dive into things, I want to give my audience some background on you because you've been in tech a long time. Now, interestingly enough, you didn't start in tech. You were in the trades, an electrician, correct?
Yes, I was.
And I think that's important too, because not too long ago, I read a book called Shopcraft is Soulcraft. And the author is one of these guys. He put himself through college doing electrician work and motorcycle repair, and he got a PhD in philosophy. And he said, we made a mistake about 100 years ago. Somehow in this country, we lumped the trades in with labor. And really, the trades are just, they should have been lumped in with the professions. Because when you look at, as he stated, the cognitive skills that, let's say, a plumber employs, they're as high in order as any accountant. You're problem solving, you're using math, you're using physics, you're out there with your hands doing things. So that's, I think, an interesting base. Now, how did you go from being an electrician and then getting a degree in, was computer science from Case Western?
It's computer engineering. Well, I'm a journeyman electrician. That takes 4 years, and it's very math intensive to get a union electrician card. It takes
right.
And I got hurt on a job, and I didn't know if I can continue doing what I was doing. I was in my, just past my middle 20s. And after getting out of the hospital, I just started going to school. I mean, I like it in education, and I kind of stumbled into a 2-year degree in physics, in calculus-based physics, and I graduated with high honors.
Wow. And then Case Western. Now, real quick, I want to just give the audience some background on you. After your education, I mean, you worked for some of the big consulting firms, and this is in the, early 90s?
Yes.
So you worked for, and I wrote some of them down, you worked for Deloitte Consulting, Capgemini, Raytheon, you worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM, just to name a few. So you've worked with some of the big boys in all of this.
Yes, and I started with Capgemini, and I was part of the startup of their SAP practice. I had day-to-day operations of a new practice. It was an exciting time.
SAP was, so you weren't just like an early adopter, you were an early implementer of SAP.
There was a rumor I may have been the first SAP technical architect in the United States.
Wow. Now, I have your resume in front of me, your vitae, some of your notable accomplishments, and I'll read these. You led the Army CIO Office analysis of the Defense Integrated Human Resource Management System program, leading to the funding of a $727 million Army Integrated Personnel and Payroll program. You championed the one airport, two location strategy to adopt enterprise-wide business processes between Reagan National, which I use all the time,
Yeah.
and Dulles Airports, reducing implementation costs by approximately 45% and operating costs by an estimated 35%. Re-engineered the challenged foreign military sales, its solution architecture and supply chain, achieving Defense Security Cooperation CIO approval and $250 million in funding from the Deputy Chief Management Office. And you managed operations for Capgemini America SAP practice startup in 1993.
Mhm.
Wow, that's a lot. That's an amazing career. Now, so you were just saying, so you started Capgemini. Obviously, you headed operations in North America for this new practice no one knew a lot about. So implementing enterprise-wide solutions, correct?
That's correct. And my construction background helped a lot in that because I was used to looking at the whole thing, not just a part of the company. So that it helped out a lot.
So you looked at total cost of ownership very holistically. You looked at problems they were having.
Yeah, across the entire company, not just an office. Some of these projects are global. They became global.
Right. So you worked at you ran operations at Capgemini, and just tell us, give us a few minutes on sketching out the rest of your career before we get into what's going on today.
Well, at Capgemini, we were just starting. I was one of the first 4 hires, and because I was more experienced, and maybe because I came from Case Western, and that office was in Cleveland, Ohio. My first thing I had to do was rebuild the relationship between Capgemini and SAP. I did not know Capgemini had been dragging their feet to get this started. So, surprise, I had to rebuild and develop a trust relationship between SAP.
So a lot of interpersonal skills had to be employed in that.
Absolutely. I had put Cap's name on the line, and hopefully Cap backed me up. We get it done this time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you probably did a number of projects. So sketch out the rest of your career for us then.
Well, Capgemini moved their practice to Houston, Texas. I was in charge of moving that practice to Houston, Texas, and all the resources we had hired. Talking them into the idea of moving to Texas from Cleveland, Ohio to Texas. But then, because I was involved with SAP so early, I was one of the first, not just adopters, I was one of the first people out there, and I got recruited and hired by Deloitte & Touche. In Houston, Texas. Deloitte just acquired a company called ICS, and I was one of the people that helped start up their SAP practice for Deloitte & Touche. Some of these things are well known in the industry. They just don't get the spotlight, and I helped this division of Deloitte & Touche get their first SAP project. It actually was Dr. Pepper in Dallas, Texas.
Huh.
Yeah, so I had to come out and all the promises a sales organization made that we weren't really prepared to make, I had to find a way as a new employee to establish the infrastructure required to compete with our competitor.
Match the expectations with the reality, huh?
Absolutely. And I was able to call people that I did not know and influence them to do things. A person I did not know, they didn't know me, but I was able to influence them to do some things that they ordinarily wouldn't have done. And we all succeeded.
Wow, fantastic. So what was next in your career progression?
Well, I was involved with a lot of things in the oil and gas industry while I was at Deloitte & Touche. And there was a lot of Y2K things going on. I did not know they were driven by that, but you had a growth of the ERP SAP marketplace, and I was involved with that growth. I had name reputation, and eventually in 1999, I was recruited by PricewaterhouseCoopers because they wanted to grow their Eastern business unit. So
right.
I was recruited really for business development and growth, and I had the name, if you will, associated with ERP.
Now, 1999, I think, is significant for tech workers here in the U.S. because that's when we really began to see these foreign outsourcing companies. Companies like Microsoft didn't want to enter into direct contracts with tech workers. They began to go through these third-party agencies. Prior to that, from let's say 90 to 99, how was the money that you earned? How was the work environment, the benefits, things like that?
Well, for me, they were good, and I actually saw a change through that process as well. It used to be, here's our data center, here's our IT organization. And that was from about 1993 to about 1996, 97. Somewhere in the middle of there, it started looking different. I have no problem with something looking different, but they're basically starting to take advantage of a globalizing workforce. You started getting companies you started hosting, so that you didn't have the data center. They were moving to a shared services environment.
Okay.
Now, I did well. I went from somewhere in there from 35,000 to start. When I went to Deloitte and Touche, they offered me 58,000. Then while I was at Deloitte, that kind of crept up and doubled.
Okay.
About 98, something like that. So, wow, I'm a little kid from Coriopolis, Pennsylvania, making $120,000 a year. Life is good, but I'm traveling. It's costing me a lot in life. But what I'm seeing in the marketplace and in the tech worker environment is outsourcing of jobs to shared services here in the United States. I understand to a limited extent shared services due to lack of services, but that's also a lack of investment in training.
Interesting. And when you say shared services here in the U.S., it's still a U.S. workforce at that point?
It's primarily a U.S. workforce. This is when the stadiums in the United States started getting renamed after hosting companies.
Okay, gotcha.
That lasted about 15 minutes
before the dot-com bust.
Yeah, before the dot-com bust. There was a lot of fallout. People lost jobs. Actually, I was downsized from Deloitte and Touche, but at the same time, I was recruited from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, this is whenever the money was good. They treated you nice. Price flew me from Houston, Texas to New York City for an interview, put me up in a nice hotel. So this is the way it used to be. You were respected as a professional, and they recruited me just as Deloitte was downsizing. Pricewaterhouse recruited me. I got a signing bonus and a slight increase in salary. And they gave me...
That is not the case anymore.
Oh, no. I went from... I left Deloitte at about 120,000.
Okay.
It's not really about money. It's just, how they...
But it's an indicator of the respect that they have for the workforce. It's an indicator of where their priorities are, I think.
Yes. When I went to PricewaterhouseCoopers, they gave me a choice of 5 cities I can move to. And I chose to be in the Washington, D.C. area to be close to my aging parents and the rest of my family. And I got a raise, got moved up to $135,000, and they gave me a $10,000 signing bonus. And they paid to move me from where I was at in Houston to wherever I just chose to live at.
Wow.
So all these are things that don't exist anymore. Yeah, but somewhere in there, right about that time, your shared service hosting environment started to move overseas.
Okay, so they have the practice down where they can pull all these services together, call center operations, help desk, things like that. They're in the U.S., employing Americans, and then you began to see the shift, the movement overseas.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's much bigger than help desk. These are skilled technical people. These are DBAs, database administrators. These are Unix administrators. These are high-salary American jobs that are going overseas. And I remember when I joined in PricewaterhouseCoopers, we had a presentation that talked about the salary range, the dollar to rupee conversion rate, and the value proposition by moving certain labor to India. And once a certain company, I won't mention the company, started that, to compete on price, everybody had to do it.
Right. It's kind of like AutoCAD in the architecture community. You know, yes, we're saving but it eventually becomes a race to the bottom because everyone's profits eventually get, shaved off.
Yeah. Absolutely, and the challenge is once your competitor, say you're doing the writing the software, you're getting that done in India at 1/10 the cost. Hey, I know what these rates are because I might still have the presentation around somewhere. Uh, Once your competitor does that to compete on price alone, you have to do it, and so like you said, it's a race to the bottom. I remember being in price, and this is not price's problem. I remember being coming to a project and walking into a room stuffed full of human beings. They're almost all Indians. It doesn't matter where they came from. It matters how they were treated. And they were saying, make sure the fire marshal doesn't come because
Oh my gosh. Think about how you were treated, flown out, put up in a nice hotel, given a signing bonus, and they're literally treating people like cattle. We're at that level.
absolutely it was shameful, but that's where everything was moving to. It looked like an environment maybe that you would see in India. I've never been there, where the human factor, what you expect to be treated in the United States, was not there.
Wow.
So,
So that's a kind of a cultural thing too. I remember years ago, I was talking to someone from Minneapolis, and we're talking about work hours and things. Like, oh, that'll never fly here. You got to get people, because culturally you have some expectations of rewards and benefits, as well as the kind of sacrifices that need to be made. And I think they're very disjointed anymore from what was the belief when we were kids, I think.
oh, absolutely. I wouldn't know what to tell somebody now. If I'm talking to young kids, I know what the market looks like. I know what the exploitation that's going on globally. So you don't know what to tell. But one of the things I heard little rumors about where software development was happening globally, even at Capgemini in '93, where the top software development houses were in the world, and none of it was here. The United States seems to have an aversion to focusing on technology. They have other countries do it, China, India, and they try to bring that here. And when I was in school, I was one of the few American students that was studying computer engineering. Not the only one, but coming back to PricewaterhouseCoopers, Price was great. It was a great experience, class organization. But sometimes you're faced to do what the market is forcing you to do, and everybody is facing that. And now there's a lot of thrashing going on.
Interesting you say that, because, and I related this story in a recent blog. I worked for Ernst & Young for a period of time as a business development guy, and I kind of got involved heavily in state and local tax and eventually property tax. And I was at a tax seminar, and there was I forget if she was a manager or director from Deloitte, and she had just gotten back from Hyderabad, India, where they created a property tax compliance outsourcing arm. Because compliance with property tax, if you're a company, you have, let's say you're a national bank like a Wells Fargo. Well, there are a lot of states and jurisdictions that require you to file a return. And when you look at the value versus the cost, it's kind of big. So they'd rather just outsource that to a group that does it all the time. And I would go around selling projects like that. And some of them were like $250,000 projects because it was based on the number of returns that had to be filed, the complexity of the return. But Deloitte was the first to actually put one of those practices in Hyderabad or India. And the cost savings were significant. And I'm listening to the presentation, and at the end of it, I asked this question. I said, when someone leaves university, they decided in a career in tax accounting, they get to a job, a corporation, the first thing that they're given is the return to do. Because from that return, it's a drudgery, but you learn the taxability of different items, how things are valued and assessed. And then eventually, after 10 years of that, you move up into the provisioning and the tax strategy. It's the bottom rung of the ladder of skills, but you have to climb up that rung. And I just said, the question was then, how do we get the people that will be skilled in the provisioning and the tax strategy if we don't have that bottom rung for them to learn the trade on? And no one could answer it. I mean, the woman, God bless her, kind of just shrugged and, gave me one of these, I don't know. And I think that has to be going on everywhere. It's even going on in the construction trades anymore. When you look at the unbridled immigration from Mexico, it's really pushed out, the Native Americans from things that, carpentry and stonemasonry and being an electrician, plumbing. Like one fellow told me, he said, when I started, because he was a tile setter, a journeyman, actually, what comes after journeyman? Tradesman or tile setter. And he said, when I started by sweeping floors and digging ditches. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, found my way into doing this. And that's the progression of many careers, whether they be highly technical or not. We take away those bottom rungs, and I think we got a big problem.
It's almost like you have to raise your own kids. America is not investing in itself. And when you outsource a job, there's other things you lose too, the tax revenue that you got from that job.
Think about it. We look around, we drive around today, and our bridges are falling down. Our cities are getting decrepit. We have homelessness. I lived in Los Angeles for 20 years, and they used to laugh at me when I said there's 100,000 homeless on the streets. So, no, it's only like 35,000. But the latest reports are, it's really 70,000. But we know it's 100,000. But it's a long way to Skid Row. It's a long way to living off of credit cards, and it usually stops with the lack of opportunity and the loss of a job, I think.
Absolutely. Say if you're living on credit cards, eventually that debt has to be paid back. In fact, they need something monthly. If you don't have a job, it's hard to do. I tell you, it's amazing when you go through all this. As my career progressed, and Price Waterhouse Management Consulting Group was acquired by IBM, so I became an IBMer. Then, I got moved. I got recruited from the Airport Authority by the Airport Authority away from IBM to run a modernization program. And one thing that's interesting, if you're talking about ERP, you're talking about something that manages a general ledger. If you tell that to a room full of accountants, they're like thinking that's what I do, and they think maybe it's over for them. And
it might very well be in some, we know that AI, jobs will be lost to AI, but traditionally in America, when in the 70s, remember the Smith Corona typewriter? When they got the cassettes, you slot them in. I thought, wow, it can't get any better. And then WordStar hit. And but eventually IBM got into computers, and Microsoft was created with its word processing programs and Excel. More opportunity ended up being created. But that's not what's going on. We have these heightened these achievements in technology, and yet we're losing net loss of jobs. Yes, the typewriter plant shut down, but yes, there were you had Intel Corporation, like I said, all these corporations that were filling the technology, building out the technology that was being developed and created. But I think this is what much more scarier than AI is the outsourcing of jobs.
America is starting to pay the price for it. One thing that's not talked about, I did breach, is when you say you have an $80,000 a year tech job, and you're paying, let's say you're paying $20,000 a year in taxes.
Right.
When you outsource that job, that tax revenue is never recovered.
No, you're right. That's actually a great point, Ellwood, because the economists use a term called the velocity of money, how many times it turns over in the economy. Like, you pull that out, and there's no velocity to it. That dollar has lost all its velocity. It's sitting overseas. Yeah, we have a little, but it's all, we don't have the kind of economic growth that one would expect from, dollars that are earned and spent locally.
Yeah, it looks good to the company bottom line just for a little while till everybody starts doing it. That when you start trying to buy things, I look at this: the low interest rates, the enormous number of sales are a real indicator of the fact that there's not that much disposable income in the economy, regardless of what they say the unemployment is. I look at it like this: if I'm twiddling my thumbs most of the time, and let me see. For about 20 years, I've probably averaged $140,000 a year. Guess what? I used to be out there buying stuff.
Right. And saving money and investing money in a retirement plan.
Absolutely.
We're just not doing that anymore.
No, it's amazing. I was doing all the right things. The 401k, saving money. I was a homeowner. I had to sell my house. I had to sell everything just to survive. They kind of cut you now. They kind of cut you off at about 50. They're not going to tell you that, but that's the number. I don't care what you're doing. 50 years old and you got to go. They're not.
There's real. You're experiencing ageism.
Yeah, I'm experiencing ageism too. But one of the things is the things I was involved in, especially whenever I was at Booz Allen for a while, working for the chief of real estate for the Army and for the Army, trying to help them manage their real estate in SAP. And because of my experience, I provided solution opportunities that really only a person with this kind of experience could do. It's not written down somewhere. You have to know what the thing's capable of. And the cost of ageism, or whatever they're calling it, probably costs them tens to hundreds of millions of dollars a year by not keeping people with experience around to lead the path forward. It's not really about me. It's about using resources wisely.
Interesting. You made me think of the recent Boeing 737 MAX, because it came out that an outsourcing company, HCL, was doing a lot of the software development. Things that had traditionally been done in-house by Boeing were now being outsourced. Any thoughts on, because that's, another example. Don't you think that's another example of the chickens coming home to roost?
Absolutely. I have a real world life experience at Raytheon that kind of gives you an example that when I was
Raytheon, they do missiles, air-to-air, surface-to-air missiles, rockets, high-order technology. A lot of defense-oriented.
Yeah, I had a scenario that's kind of like Boeing's scenario, except it was handled a different way. Of course, this is about in 2002. Raytheon implemented SAP, and before we moved core processes to SAP, I wanted to make sure we had the production environment in place to test the most critical business processes on it before it went into production.
Okay.
And in that testing, we found a lot of things that were not up to snuff. If we would not have tested that, the profits required to meet certain financial obligations would have came right out of Raytheon's own bottom line. They would not be able to invoice the government, and they would have to pay 10,000 workers out of their own pockets for months. That could have bankrupted Raytheon. So when you have to test critical processes before they go into production, find out where they bend and break. And that's where Raytheon's problems are.
But you also yourself, it's like you said, that level of experience that you brought to the table. It's interesting. I was speaking with someone who works for a Fortune 100 company.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me that if you walk in, back at a time when he worked in the government, he walked into a government office, an IT shop, and it was primarily H-1B people, all of them from India.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all on the phones. And he said, they're not wasting their time, or they're not playing around. They're on the phone with job support in India because they don't know basic code. Their basic coding skills are not very good. So literally they're asking job support to come over, take over their computer, and help them through their problems.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I gotta believe that that's going to be catching up to us in a big way, like you just mentioned. That was an example of crisis averted, but how many other crises are out there because we are not watching our P's and Q's, as you might say.
I have to make a quick statement because I misspoke a company. The company with the challenge that we averted at Raytheon is Boeing, not Raytheon. Raytheon averted the problem. Boeing is experiencing the problem. I'll tell you one of the challenges. Whenever I went to school, processing power, memory, and all those tech resources and what they mean to your business, you had to contemplate those things. Nowadays, things are kind of fast and you don't have to learn that much. And, we can do it anyway. The process is powerful enough. And sometimes it's not powerful enough.
Huh.
And that's why these people, they don't have the educational background. They just don't. They learn to write code and that's it. We had something when I was in school called the Big O. That has to do with performance requirements of the computer. So you had to think about that. Or some of the technical people on here, nested SQL statements. You have to think about those things. But they don't have to think about those things. They're not talking about them now because they say, it's fast enough. Well, sometimes it's not, or it's going to take longer or something else goes wrong. If you don't have the educational background, you can't even evaluate these problems.
Wow, interesting. And that's again, that speaks to the basic skill level. The expectation should be such at the individual level, but they're not. They're just thinking the group. And we look at it like our MBA programs. I believe like our banking system, got ripped a new one in 2008 because it wasn't bankers calling the shots. It was these MBAs. They go, they work in groups and everything, come up with group solutions, but they don't have the experience in that industry. And then they have these solutions that are not tested, and they have theories that they're attempting to apply that really don't have a lot of, that in the end aren't very proven.
I found that sometimes it's not education just in general. It's some of it's life experience, or I can rest on when I worked in construction. If you make certain mistakes in construction, you can lose a finger, you can use this, you can lose your life. So you get feedback. You get immediate feedback. So and some things are just a talent that the person has. When I was working in PricewaterhouseCoopers. When I worked at Raytheon, there are certain things about the testing process that I discovered, and it's not something I learned in the class. That's something I learned in life experiences. And you have to be bold enough to say, here's how I see it, and be able to build a case, write a white paper, and justify your position. And then you're able to sell that to executives, and then they believe in what you're proposing.
Right. Interesting. Wow. And here, when all of that work is being done overseas now, I got to imagine, like, kind of just adding to what you stated, it has to really impact that feedback loop, that instead of making the system stronger, it becomes it begins to break down. And I got to think that that's how we can't really improve our systems the way we need to. It's probably why personally I'm just getting used to just things being a little worse this year than they were the year before.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's the relationships that you build. I remember being at Raytheon and I was having lunch with the Raytheon program manager. That's pretty far up the power chain. And some people at Price were nervous, but it's because I had a relationship. We talked. The feedback loop was there. I understood his concerns, and I came up with a solution for testing that met his concerns. You can't do that when you're 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 miles away.
No, you can't, can you?
No, you can't.
Wow. Interesting. It's, and again, Boeing is just one example of a crisis that I think there are many other Boeings out there. And it's all the result of this trend to, I call it the asset stripping of America. We saw it in the early 90s with the movement of the manufacturing base overseas. And now I believe they're stripping out the intellectual property. They see that the growth markets are in Asia. So it's like, okay, we're going to get the intellectual property over there. We'll make more profit, more money, because the neoliberal model is really the frictionless movement of people and capital to maximize profit. And ultimately, this isn't going to end well for us.
No, and on the economic sense, there's a lot of friction against the petrodollar. If they ever topple that, the United States is in big trouble. Because right now, is because of the markets and the fact that around the globe they buy our debt allows us to live the lifestyle we live. But right now, we don't have the manufacturing capabilities to rebuild our own infrastructure. We have to depend on, I believe that China's the number one producer of steel. The United States is somewhere about fourth or fifth. And even, I'll tell you what's interesting now, if you show up and you're not Indian on the job, they start to wonder if you know what you're talking about.
That's amazing to me. That's such a cultural shift. Oh, it's a heck of a thing. But, what's great is our audience got to hear from you what things used to be like.
Yeah.
And what things are like currently. Right now, we're fighting a bill called S-386 that would essentially allow Indians who are here on an H-1B, which is a dual intent visa, to pretty much dominate the employment green card based system for the next 10 years if they're able to remove the country caps. And to me, it's a reward for bad behavior. And it's frightening that no one in Congress, this companion bill passed in the Congress by a large majority. And it scares me, Ellwood, that our politicians don't seem to get what's going on.
If you look at the market, one of the largest IT companies now is an Indian company called Infosys.
Yes.
Yeah, by far. They're competing with your IBMs and your PricewaterhouseCoopers, and because a large percentage of their base is going to be from India, and not only that, I'll tell you something, try interviewing in one of those places. I have. And they kind of go through the motions. They're going to support their own first, and they don't even understand the American business environment, nor they may not be vested like your employees to be.
Right, because it's another country. It's other, whereas here there's not a lot of places to go. I live in a city where it's not unusual to find a family that's been there for 5 to 9 generations.
Wow.
So the personal reputation is very important, much more important than I found like in a place like Los Angeles where I lived for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's helpful. I mean, the workmanship can typically be counted on because there's a social checks and balances going on, and that all of that is lacking when we globalize these processes. And again, like you were saying, economically, it's a detriment to all of us because if we don't have the job, we can't pay the taxes. If we don't have the tax base, well, we can't do the investments and infrastructure that we need to be, just to preserve what we have, let alone build things like high-speed rail and solar panels and large-scale wind turbines to get us off the oil and away from the invade and invite paradigm.
It's really, really a surprise it doesn't get talked about a lot. When you worked at Ellwood Packard or IBM or PricewaterhouseCoopers, each company had a culture because they retained employees. That is gone. They become what they used to call second-tier companies, body shops. They hire people for particular projects, and then when that project's over, if they don't have something for you, you got to go. And that is what even the largest companies have become. You cannot establish a culture within the company. It used to be an IBM or you're a PricewaterhouseCoopers. That is effectively pretty much gone.
Right. I mean, like EDS had a culture under Ross Perot, the tie, the suit. I worked at a company called Ryan for 8 years. It had an amazing culture. And the people were typically much younger than like an Ernst & Young or a KPMG. But what they had was this amazing culture where you spent a week. It used to be 2 weeks. It ended up being just a week at the headquarters where you were right down to when there was a lunch and you were taught table manners and you were taught the way to do things in the office, how a document, it was, they call it getting Ryanized, but they were actually a really superior tax firm because they had this amazingly strong culture. And everyone was part of that culture, knew their place in it, knew what the expectations were, knew what the rewards were. In fact, everyone's rewards were tied into the profit of the company ultimately. So I totally hear and understand what you're saying about culture and frankly, now the lack of it.
Yeah. But one of the strengths, one of the advantages I had is I worked with those major companies when they still had a culture. And because of that, there's a work ethic that's also associated with that. Expectations. I remember being heavily involved in what they call tiger teams. That's the business. Those are the people that write the proposals. They're very important to business development. I spend as much time doing that as anything. But every company has a way they go about responding to proposals. And you learn things. You have to take bid and risk management classes, things like that. So you understand, should we bid on this? Is there too much risk associated with it? What's the profitability? Is it funded? Who's the champion? Who's the sponsor? Is that at the level we really need to have for us to go to a project this size? And even when I went from IBM to the airport authority, it's because I brought those things with me, helped me prepare them to go to what they call industry day.
Because you understood the total cost of ownership. Yes, we sold $1 million contract, but it cost us $1.2 million to service it. Wait a minute, we didn't do very well. And that's where that experience and that culture and thinking holistically, understanding the total cost of ownership and having personal ownership in how that company does because, hey, this is where I might be the rest of my life. Boy, that really seems to be lacking. And I think that's an important point to bring up. Well, Ellwood, we are at about the 45-minute mark. This has been really an amazing conversation that I know my audience will get a lot out of. Is there anything I missed that you think you want to mention?
You know what? I mentioned earlier that no matter what you choose to pursue, make sure that you have your path clear. Because at 50 years old, they're not going to tell you this. At 50 years old, they're going to find a way to get you out the door. I've seen such a trend when I was in the workforce, and eventually I became a victim of it. And there's no such thing as working somewhere a long period of time. That's gone. In fact, I think the new generation has already seen that. That ship has sailed.
Yeah, because I talk to people, and they'll say things like, oh, I'm going to work till I drop. It's like, no, we'll work until they don't want us anymore. And then we're going to be out of work. Yeah.
They'll work you till you drop, and they'll just replace you. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. So we really need to change a lot, and I think we can do it. On my father's side, I'm the son of an immigrant. My mother came here to the U.S., but on my father's side, my great-grandfather came here from Lithuania, and he went to the coal mines of Pennsylvania, eventually succumbed to black lung. But, he was one of those people that were there. They hate things like the Hazleton Massacre. They were fighting for their rights, fighting for decent working conditions. And eventually, like I said, he succumbed to black lung, but, he was out there fighting. He was an activist, a union organizer. And I think that's what's required of our tech workers today. It's been, the cavalry isn't coming. We have to go out there, learn our political process. We are a democracy, and take control of it.
Absolutely.
Well, to Ellwood, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. To my audience, thanks so much for joining us. If you like this, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give us a thumbs down. Hey, it all helps with the algorithm. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go onto our website, subscribe to our newsletter. That way you're kept up to date with all of our latest writings, videos, calls to action, things of that nature. All right. Well, everyone have a great day. And again, Ellwood, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.